The Formula One World Championship is brought to you on Eurosport by Ford, Formula One's most successful team. Hitachi. Elf Oil World Champion. And Goodyear.
Welcome on Eurosport for the morning warm-up for this afternoon's 52nd Monaco Grand Prix, the fourth round of the FIA Formula One World Championship. Well, the morning warm-up, John, well, it's late morning here. It's nearly 11, and we're watching Mika Häkkinen. And before we get into anything else, John, Mika Häkkinen was one of the drivers who was outstanding in qualifying yesterday.
Indeed, and it was a very impressive, in fact, mighty is the word I would use, performance from Mika Häkkinen and, of course, Michael Schumacher on pole position. Interestingly, looking at the statistics from last year's Grand Prix, 2 seconds faster the front row time Mika Häkkinen achieved compared to that of Ayrton Senna last year. And equally, Michael Schumacher 2 seconds quicker than Alain Prost's time in the Williams Renault. So in spite of all the changes in regulations, the lack or the loss of traction control, active suspension, and all the other electronic gadgetry, Grand Prix cars are considerably quicker this year at Monaco. More so, I would say, than any time before.
So the grid for today's race, Mika Häkkinen and Michael Schumacher on the front row, or Michael Schumacher and Mika Häkkinen, we should say. Then Gerhard Berger and Damon Hill on the second row of the grid. Now the warm-up is 30 minutes here in Monaco, but Eurosport viewers can stay on for another 25 minutes when we will talk to Ron Dennis, Mika Häkkinen and other people down in the pit lane to keep you up to date for this afternoon's race. So we are on air for another hour. Watching Gerhard Berger. Well, John, quicker than Jean Alesi.
I think, Alain, that's to be expected. Of course, Jean Alesi making his return to the cockpit of his Ferrari after a neck injury that kept him out for 2 Grand Prix. And I don't care if you miss 2 Grand Prix these days, well, even without an injury, you just lose that little fine edge that all your competitors have. And I'm quite certain that Jean Alesi is finding the bumps around the Monaco circuit uncomfortable. Any injury to the neck takes a long time to heal, and it's very important not to get into the car too quickly. Jean Alesi, we watched him throughout Thursday and Saturday qualifying, driving as ever on the edge. In fact, I suspect that he was probably trying too hard. Well, the sad side, Damon Hill managed to reverse into the barriers. That's done at the Louvre Hotel, and I hope there is no damage for Damon. And it's really been a difficult weekend, I would say. Thursday and Saturday, it was only towards the end of qualifying that the Williams team and Damon Hill seemed to get the combination of cars set up. Let's watch it under brakes. All of a sudden, back end just snaps out. That's been a fairly familiar sight throughout the year, not Damon specifically, but when a car loses grip at the rear, once it's gone, there's no recovery. And there was almost an ideal example of just what the drivers have to cope with this year.
So Damon Hill out, and I wonder, John, whether he can get back to the pits in time to use the spare, or maybe that is the spare.
Whatever it is, the engine, I would say, has stalled. The car not particularly movable, whether it's caught in a gear. There should be a button on the gear change, in spite of it, the engine being stalled, to enable it to select neutral, but, well, maybe he has kept the engine going, but certainly confusion down at the Louvre Hotel, and just another irritation for the Williams team this weekend.
Oh, bright sunny day, sunny morning here in Monaco. And again with us in the commentary booth, Richard Grundy. And Richard, as far as we understand, no change in Carl's situation overnight.
No, that's right, Allard. He's still in a stable condition. He had a good night last night, I'm informed, but the doctors are still being very cautious.
And John, would you agree that that's basically good news?
It appears that the neurologists in the hospital in Nice are very, I think, comfortable now with Carl Wendlinger's condition. They're keeping him in this artificial coma. That is the best way, they believe, to help his recovery. And we're just now getting a daily bulletin. And certainly on Saturday, the news seemed encouraging, and it appears to be the same this morning. But it is a long process, and I think it'll only be when the neurologists are comfortable with the amount of progress that Carl Wendlinger is making that they then will issue a more detailed statement.
Well, there's the man on pole position, Michael Schumacher, the Benetton Ford, and you can recognize Michael's car by the orange stickers on his front wing. JJ Leto does not have those, so it's easier for us to recognize which driver is in the car, because both those helmets do look alike when they come towards you. Well, John, there's a great race here in Monaco today, but there's another great race in America in 2 weeks' time, the Indianapolis 500. And on the provisional pole, we should say, because pole position day yesterday was cut short, is Al Unser Jr. in the Marlboro Penske Mercedes. Raoul Boesel is second and Jacques Villeneuve third. And Al Unser Jr. on that provisional pole, 228 mile an hour average. That is very fast indeed. Nigel Mansell, incidentally, is fifth for the moment on 224 miles per hour.
Well, Michael Schumacher in the middle of a little run, and of course he has the choice of cars. He may choose the race car or his backup car. One of the big interesting features will be whether teams decide not just if they're going to make pit stops, but how many of them they choose to make. Because in spite of the difficulties of overtaking on the Monaco circuit, nonetheless, the quickest way to run the 78 laps of the 52nd Grand Prix this afternoon is by stops for tyres and for refueling. And it's the nature of the circuit with so many low-speed corners, a lot of acceleration. So if you have a low start-up weight, your performance curve in the early part of the race is going to be, well, just superior to those that may try and do. I can't imagine anybody's going to go through without pit stop, but certainly if the people that are going to commit to one, as opposed to those that might gamble on the two, it is going to be a gamble. Also remember, a mandatory 80-kilometer speed limit in the pit lane for the Grand Prix, and that's the first time we've seen that speed limit introduced into Grand Prix racing. There has always been one. In fact, Pedro Lamy got done yesterday for exceeding a 50-kilometer speed limit. I think Martin Brundle got a little touch as well. He was doing 68 somewhere in the pit lane as well. All these regulations are now going to be very much more strictly adhered to. The penalty for exceeding it in the Grand Prix is a stop-go penalty. The only area we are still not clear on is the introduction of a lottery system by which you had to pre-declare the point at which you wanted to make your pit stop. We're not sure whether that situation will be in place for the race or not. We will bring the news later.
Michael Schumacher, currently the fastest man on the circuit, as he's basically been all weekend. Michael Schumacher on a 1:24.169, but when he comes round to start-finish, I was going to say he'll probably go quicker, but he's decided to go into the pits. Then it's Jean Alesi, Gerhard Berger, Martin Brundle, Christian Fittipaldi and Pierluigi Martini. And John, Christian Fittipaldi, a man who qualified sixth, just in front of teammate Gianni Morbidelli.
Well, the entire Footwork Ford team are very happy indeed with the performance of Morbidelli and Fittipaldi. As we said during qualifying on Saturday, a straightforward, easy setup, easy-to-drive car has got to be as good a way, unless you're a major constructor, McLaren, Williams or Benetton. Why complicate matters?
Damon Hill has made it back to the pits. He is out on the circuit at the moment. So Damon has probably walked back, or maybe he did bump start that car for some. I mean, John, would it be possible if that car's stuck in gear, get in, let it roll down the hill and get it going again?
Well, certainly at that part of the circuit, the hill is steep enough to allow the car to run forward and catch it, bumping it. But it's just a further little aggravation, and it's been a very difficult, as I say, weekend throughout for the Williams Renault team, and of course Damon Hill now having to shoulder the entire responsibility of driving in the team here. There's only one car, of course, so conveying information on your own really illustrates the value of two drivers in a team.
Running with Martin Brundle, and as you saw just a couple of seconds ago, we can actually run the in-car camera. We can't, but it is possible now to run the in-car camera going through the tunnel. And John, that shot from Beretta in the tunnel, that must be awesome.
Well, it's a very impressive shot, and it is the most realistic onboard camera that we have seen. So in the tunnel, the big contrast of light and shade, and that's what the driver's got to cope with.
Michael Schumacher, 124.169. Then it's Martin Brundle, 124.188. Damon Hill, 124.400. Christian Fittipaldi is 4th, and Jean Alesi 5th. Welcome back here on Eurosport. You're back with Martin Brundle, currently the fastest man on the circuit. Done 6 laps, a 1:23.929, and that's actually gone fairly quick, John, I must say.
Well, Martin was disappointed after Saturday qualifying. He did have a little contact to the wall, and he thinks that maybe that affected the car handling. Certainly, watching the amount of wheel spin he was getting in the low-speed corners and the blue smoke coming off the tyres, and then going through Tabac where he had the car sideways, leaving rubber all the way up the hill, he did damage something on the car. He's trying to make up for it now, but of course, from his starting position, he's going to have to work very hard, and that is again where he will rely not just on his own skill, but on the strategy that McLaren will try to implement for Brundle and Mika Häkkinen this afternoon.
Martin Brundle's 1:23.929 is only 0.3 of a second slower than the fastest lap by Alain Prost last year in the race, John.
Well, I think we're going to see a very quick race indeed. If the qualifying times are anything to go by, we're going to see a sprint, 78 laps, of course, with the benefit now of refueling, which was not permitted last year. Tyre stops were. But the strategy now with refueling is to basically still determined by the tyre performance, but the amount of fuel you run affects the tyre performance. The two things are so important, and to know what is the right strategy on a street track like Monaco is even more important.
We just got the information from Goodyear that all drivers will start on the D-compound tyre, John, and that Goodyear needs one stop because of wear purposes.
Well, that will be the recommendation, but of course performance is another factor, and I have to think that a team at the front, certainly either McLaren or Benetton, have got to think about a two-stop race.
Johnny Herbert qualified in 16th position, and that's the best he's done so far this year. The car may be a little off the pace, John, but it's been reliable so far.
It's been a very hard year so far for Lotus, but Johnny Herbert has finished in the top 10 consistently. He's done his bit, I would say, outstandingly well. What he's crying out for is a car that doesn't do what you saw as Lotus doing there. It's sliding all over the place. Now, Monaco is by and large a circuit where mechanical grip, that's the chassis side of the package, really comes into its own. The aerodynamic side, well, you can be a bit crude about it. You can put on, literally, you see the rear wing on Herbert's Lotus. It's a bit like a barn door. It's a crude but effective way of getting downforce on a low-speed circuit.
Damon Hill's gone faster than Gerhard Berger, a 1:23.732, and Damon is now the fastest man on that Monaco street circuit. Gerhard Berger in the pits, about second fastest. Martin Brundle now in third. Michael Schumacher fourth. Christian Fittipaldi, Alesi and Morbidelli completing the top 7, and only Damon Hill out of that top 7 is on the circuit at the moment. Rubens Barrichello 13th at the moment, John, but kept on his toes yesterday by Andrea de Cesaris.
Again, a similar situation to Jean Alesi, and of course Rubens out of the car at Imola, a massive shunt. It's a question of getting yourself back in. You rebuild your confidence. All the little feelings that you took for granted, you're a little bit apprehensive about. Monaco is an aggressive circuit. At the same time, you've got to be relaxed. You've got to let the car flow. If you try to push too hard, if you try to force the car, it'll not work for you. On the other hand, of course, de Cesaris now in his second Grand Prix of '94, beginning to feel more comfortable and beginning to get more out of the car and himself. It's putting Rubens Barrichello under a small amount of pressure. But, of course, in 2 weeks' time, when we go back to the Spanish Grand Prix at Barcelona, Rubens Barrichello will have regular teammate Eddie Irvine back in the cockpit alongside him.
And Andrea de Cesaris starting his 199th Grand Prix today here. Will he ever make 200, John, I wonder?
Well, a landmark for Andrea de Cesaris if he could make the 200. But also the other landmark would be he's never won a Grand Prix. He's the Grand Prix driver who's gone the furthest without a single Grand Prix win.
Eric Comas has improved to a 1:24.024, and now Comas is in 4th position. And JJ Leto is trying to pass Christian Fittipaldi, but it's not really working.
Again, JJ, he's not found the key to the lap here in Monaco, in spite of living here and liking the place a great deal, but for some reason he's not been able to put together the kind of performance teammate Michael Schumacher has, starting way down in 17th place in the grid. His race strategy is going to be entirely different, I suspect, to Michael Schumacher.
There we see the car accelerate up the hill, a very steep hill indeed. And that's the only thing, John, I think they should have into those in-car cameras is you can't really see the elevation of the circuit because that hill is very steep indeed.
And equally, the run down into Mirabeau is just about as steep, and we often see people braking into Mirabeau, braking into the Loews Herpen, locking up wheels. Part of the reason is the car is on quite a steep decline. Weight transfer and the shifter weight unloads wheels. It's very easy in a downhill braking zone to attempt to brake too late.
JJ currently 13th. And going through to back, John's favourite corner, and I must say the entry of the swimming pool, John, that's very quick as well.
In fact, I would say in these cars it's at the point where the car is potentially faster than the driver. You come into it 212, 214 kilometers per hour. The change of direction is so rapid. The only benefit, I suspect, is that the current Grand Prix car reacts equally fast. So it's almost a squeeze of the wrist with the left hand to go left and a squeeze of the wrist and the right hand to go right. That's the amount of steering movement you're probably having to imply.
Mika Hakkinen at 22.035, then Michael Schumacher at 22.790, and Damon Hill at 23.732. Gerhard Berger then 23.847, And we are 7 minutes and 30 seconds away from the end of the morning warm-up. And you see, I mean, although it doesn't count, John, it's nice to be fastest.
I think any time you can top the list, and Mika Häkkinen now just confirming he is still quickest in that 22.035. It's a good feeling to go into the Grand Prix knowing that the setup that you chose was the setup that was the quickest in that morning 30-minute session. But of course, it's really the work that you did on Thursday and on Saturday that is the key to this afternoon's Grand Prix. And I would say McLaren, with their experience here, remember they've won 9 out of the last 10 Grand Prix. That's experience you can't buy, and that's that experience that really is going to help Mika Häkkinen and Martin Brundle this afternoon. And that's really, when we speak to Mika shortly after this session finishes, that's one of the things I would like to ask him. He's working now in a team, he's the #1 driver, working in a team with so much backup and experience. I wonder how much he feels that is helping him.
Martin Brundle finishing a lap. And let's see whether he can improve on that 1:23.929. And he has 1:22.930. Oh, and just Mika a 1:21.807. Thank you very much. Another, I mean, a 1:21.8, John, is just basically very fast. I mean, that's way faster than last year's pole position.
We've had him 12th or 13th, in fact, on the grid. Eric Comas 13th at 22.211. And of course, that time, the time Mika Häkkinen has just said, is with something like 40 or so litres of fuel, whereas in qualifying it will be down as low as 10 or even 8.
More and more people out on the circuit. Well, Martin Brundle, that 1:22.9. John Martin is a driver who can look after a car, and maybe he would go for one stop less than Mika is doing, go for 2 different strategies in the team.
I think there's a very good cause for that. You allow Häkkinen, who's at the front of the grid, to try and take full advantage and either lead the Grand Prix or follow as closely as possible behind Schumacher. Conversely, let Martin Brundle adopt a different strategy. That's the way a Grand Prix can be won here at Monaco, but starting 8th, it is a little bit far back. You never know. But Renault produced some interesting facts and figures in relation to weight and a lap time, and they've calculated around Monaco circuit 30 kilograms of weight is equivalent to a second per lap. So cars that are starting with a small amount of fuel and are anticipating 2 stops have got a significant speed advantage in the early part of the race. And if they can build that speed up and build a buffer between themselves and those that are going for the 1 stop, it may well be possible for them to get in and out of the pits here and still retain position, or not lose position, more importantly.
Well, Schumacher 22.7 of a second away from Mika Häkkinen, and he's got just over 3.5 minutes left to do something about that. Now remember, back in Imola, Michael Schumacher wasn't very quick in the morning warm-up, but those first opening laps and then in the rest of the Grand Prix, he was very quick indeed.
Well, that is just simply confidence on the part of Schumacher and the Benetton Ford team. You know, very often when you're at that high plateau of performance and confidence, it's not necessary to try and be quickest in every session. You know that your car is good, you know you've got the race set up. Essentially, the front-running teams, and the Kia Katayama this time for a change, popping out from the escape route of Saint-Devoux. But Benetton, McLaren, I would have said Williams here, slightly different situation for them, but Benetton and McLaren basically know what they've got. Their race setup has been predetermined over years of being here, plus 2 days of running. this morning is just a confirmation and a little maybe fine tune of that setup. The race, of course, starting at 3:30, very much later in the afternoon than the normal Grand Prix start-up time. Conditions will change. We've got, looking out to the left of us, high cloud just covering the mountain that overlooks the Principality of Monaco. So weather here has been a factor in the past, but I think the forecast for this afternoon is fine and fair.
While Mika Hakkinen is out on the circuit, Damon Hill is now the second fastest on the 1:22.038. Then it's Martin Brundle third, Michael Schumacher fourth, Gerhard Berger fifth. And still, this man, car number 7, is top of the list. And still, John, if you look at the difference between Hakkinen's car and Brundle's car, Martin seems to have a little more wheel spin, especially here.
In qualifying on Saturday afternoon, he had a lot more wheel spin. Now, I don't understand why the cars would appear to differ. Now, driver preference, of course, is a part of that, but wheel spin on a street track is something you do not want.
In 8th position so far is Andrea de Cesaris, 9th Ukio Katayama, and 10th Eric Comas. So the 4 HB runners, Fittipaldi and Comas, in the top 10. And Andrea, I think experience counts, John.
Yes, it will do, and he's been here since 1981. I think he knows his way around it quite well. But really, outside of McLaren and Benetton, Williams, arguably Ferrari, but with footwork, Tyrrell, LaRousse, Jordan, it's going to be a really tight midfield once again. Of course, it is experience that does ultimately count here. And we've seen from many times in Monte Carlo that Tyrrell, on occasions, poor grid positions, but get up there into the points by the end of the race.
Mika Hakkinen improved to a 1:21.670. There you see the time on your screen. Oh, that would have 11th on the grid.
Well, in this situation, there's no doubt. I think Hakkinen has got a low fuel load on board.
Well, I hope Michael Schumacher has got that as well then, John. He's just done a 1:21.2. So the pace in the morning warm-up, very fast indeed. A 1:21.294 and a 1:21.670. Then Damon Hill, 0.7 of a second behind Schumacher. Then is Martin Brundle, Gerhard Berger and Jean Alesi. And I can hear a V12 going round. That's Gerhard's. A 1:22.943. He bettered his time there.
Well, this is the closing moment of the 30-minute session, the flag out. And from now until 3 o'clock, when the cars then begin to go out to take their place on the grid, it's down to the engineers. Most, I would think, will want to leave the cars well alone. And the drivers will now go off. They'll have their driver briefing. And after that, let's say, shambolic start in Imola 2 weeks ago, I do hope that everybody does pay attention. The start time, of course, very crucial indeed. And observation is vital to ensure that if a car does stop on the grid, doesn't make it off, that those behind are both aware of it. And if they do see a lovely gap opening up, they do think that there may well be a car or something in the way.
There's Damon's car. Damon, 22.0, John, that's 0.7 of a second away. That's closer than he's been all weekend. So the weekend, well, maybe it started to turn around a little bit. I mean, Damon getting closer, and who knows what's going to happen in the race. I still think he's, I mean, in the race, he's a force to be reckoned with.
There's no question about it at all. I think it's just the team have had an awful fortnight. They've had to pick up and go motor racing again. They've got to find that rhythm. As I say, Damon Hill is now leading the team, and the responsibility is entirely different from having a teammate to share it with. And of course, someone as outstanding as Ayrton Senna, so much experience, he could guide the team through with the 94 regulations, and the team are working very hard to get the kind of car performance that they'd enjoyed in 92 and 93. That all rests on Damon Hill, and the responsibility is very big indeed.
There we see the top 13. Again, Michael Schumacher fastest. Johnny Herbert ended up 14th, and the rest we see. And we've only seen 23 cars out. Paul Belmondo did not go out. Well, it's the end of the warm-up, but it's not the end of Eurosport's broadcast here. Bye, John. See you later. John Watson going down to the pit lane while we go to a commercial break. John will make his way down to the pictures we are seeing now, and then we'll be back with interviews from the pit lane, while I'm staying in the booth with some other guest. We'll be back after the break. Please stay with us here on Eurosport. Welcome back here on Eurosport, where we are watching pictures from the pit lane at the moment, where John is making his way down. There we see the McLaren Peugeot team, and I think that is roughly where John will be going in trying to find Ron Dennis, Mika Häkkinen and other members of that team. This picture, glorious picture from Monaco. That's actually the new harbour. Well, this isn't. And while we are here, we've still got a booth full. It's very nice indeed, and that's what we call the postcards from Monaco. Monaco, a very nice and quiet little place for most of the time, but there's the Monte Carlo Rally and there's the Formula 1 Grand Prix, and then this place is buzzing. It's got beautiful gardens, a beautiful palace, casino, and 95% of the year it's got beautiful weather as well. Well, we've got two marketing people here in the booth with us at the moment, actually. Two Richards as well, Richard West and Richard Grundy. Before we go down to the pits, how important for a team, and I could ask both your reactions actually, is the Monaco Grand Prix?
Well, as a motor race, I think we all acknowledge that the Monaco Grand Prix doesn't make a lot of sense. It's extremely difficult to overtake. But at the same time, it is the showcase event, paradoxically, of the Grand Prix circus. It's glamorous. The pictures that we're seeing here on your screens at home demonstrate that. It's a tremendous draw from people all over the world, and it's one of the things that makes Formula 1 as famous as it is.
Well, we are watching Michael Schumacher's laps, his pole position lap. Richard, how many of your sponsors specifically want to come to Monaco?
Well, normally, Alan, a great deal. Obviously, things are slightly different in the light of what happened to us at Imola, but we still have a great number of guests here this weekend. We have some 120 up on one of the terrace roofs who we'll be spending time with presenting Damon later today. And we have another group of guests down in the harbour on a boat. It's basically, as Richard Grundy said, it's where everybody wants to be, and more importantly, wants to be seen. I think that's the thing that everybody comes to Monte Carlo for. We're fortunate today, the weather's improved, so people can make the most of their boats and their day's hospitality. But generally, as Richard said, it's the jewel in the crown. It's the race that everybody wants to be at.
It's a bit like the Indy 500 in America, I suppose. Well, Michael Schumacher's lap yesterday, outstanding, a 1:18.560, 2 seconds quicker than last year's pole position time. But remember, last year we had a day of rain, a wet day, so basically the teams were maybe chasing their own tail a little bit by only having one dry day to set up the cars. But the year before, Nigel Mansell with wider tyres, traction control, he did a 1:19.456, and Michael went basically a full second quicker than that time, and this lap is just outstanding. The good thing about the Benetton team is that they run this telemetry, and you can see the speeds and acceleration and deceleration, and it's just phenomenal. Going through Mirabeau, probably around 85 kilometers an hour, then accelerating up to 160 and then braking again to, let's say, roughly 50 kilometers an hour in the space of probably 80 yards. Richard, although the team had a big shock when Carl had his accident earlier in the weekend, on an upbeat note, you're powered by Mercedes engines, so is Erlanger Jr. on the provisional pole in Indy.
That's right, Allard. I think that's an indication of things to come, both in the United States and on this side of the Atlantic. As you know, Sauber Mercedes is relatively new to Formula One. This is only the second full season. Everybody's well aware that there's a lot of catching up to do. We're up against some tremendously good competitors such as Williams, who've been winning races for well over 15 years now. McLaren have also been there for a long time. They won many world championships. Benetton, of course,
this weekend. Turn out such a top team, I think, is good for all of us, and it adds to the general competitiveness of Formula One today.
There we see Mika Häkkinen. That was his fastest qualifying lap, a 19.488, and the man that's walking through the pit lane at the moment, Gerhard Berger, is qualified third, a 19.958, and you're watching his qualifying lap as well at the moment. This was all yesterday afternoon. Richard, there's a lot have been said about Carl's situation and Mercedes and Sauber, or Sauber withdrawing from this race, but it's got nothing to do with Mercedes' commitment to motorsport in general, has it?
Absolutely not, no, Allard. In fact, there was a statement issued today by Mr. Helmut Werner, who's the boss of Mercedes-Benz AG, and he reaffirmed Mercedes' commitment to motorsport, to Formula One in particular. But at the same time, he did call, and I'm sure we all go along with this, for continued improvements in the realms of safety, both not just for the drivers, but also for spectators.
Yeah, and I don't want to cut anything away from John, who's down in the pit lane talking to various people about safety and things. But one of the things that struck me on the mostly press conference with these, he did say, like, well, we have to think about the spectators as well. These people are paying to watch a motor race, and we should be able to give them a very safe time on a grandstand, and that we should really look after them.
Yes, I agree with that, Alan, because obviously, you know, we are providing a spectacle for the general public, and it's important that they are treated in a safe and fair way. And I think, you know, it's a fair time to say, really, the television companies now, the media, give such enormous coverage to Grand Prix racing around the world that we do owe a duty to make sure that all of the people that are there live also are safe. Actually, what you've got here is, I'll hand back to Alan, you've actually got a lap of the circuit here now in a road car. Alan.
Well, Richard, it's interesting. They've changed the tunnel. There's more lights in the tunnel. Philippe Alliot talking about it. The director of the circuit, basically. They've also painted the inside and the Armco. It's all white, so to make it as light as possible. The cars are traveling very fast through there. You don't really want to go into a dark hole and come out of it in bright sunshine. Well, Philippe Alliot going through the chicane. On the left, you see the Armco. You see the boats in the harbour. They've got to be about 50 meters away, just for safety measures, just in case something breaks off a car, or, well, worse, maybe the whole car jumps the Armco. On the right, you see debris fencing. The grandstand's high up, the debris fencing there, just in case someone does get off the road. And this is what it looks like from a Formula One car. And the black containers you see alongside the circuit, they're all filled with water, and on impact, here we see them. You see the cap, and the cap will come off when a car hits the container, and it'll work in a way like a tire barrier. And they're actually, I think they're very, very safe indeed, or they're improving safety anyway. So although the barrier is very close all around this Monaco circuit, they are trying to improve safety for drivers, spectators, and everybody involved. 27 kilometers of Armco around this circuit. But I suppose a street circuit, you're never gonna have it as safe as a normal road course, is it?
Well, I don't know about that, Alan. I think the interesting thing, looking at these pictures, just on a positive note, is I had the good fortune to be taken around by Damon Hill on a motorcycle the other day. And as you go around this circuit, you're seeing a view pretty much what the Grand Prix drivers see. Most of the views you see on TV are actually high up, but when you're being taken through this by a Grand Prix driver, as he says, you come into some of these corners and they don't have the benefit that we have. They've got this very, very low line of vision, so they have to be very, very precise on when they pick their turn-in points, when they actually clip the apex of the corner and their exit points. And as you see here, you've got this lovely high view, but as Damon was saying, as you come out of the tunnel in 6th gear down here, you actually have a little crest in the road that we can't see, and then you're down on that chicane, very hard on the brakes, quick left-right flick, and then down into the swimming pool complex. Martin Brundle was telling me at that point in the swimming pool complex where you take the first left-hander, at the moment admittedly you're looking at the chicane, but Martin says that point where you turn left into the swimming pool complex is taken at about 130 miles an hour.
Yeah, we can see that on the telemetry. This is actually the point where there was an accident. Max Mosley.
We are going to reduce the size of the diffuser, and I apologise for the technicalities, but I'll make it clear what we're talking about. We're going to reduce the size of the diffuser. We are going to raise the front wing end plates, and we're going to restrict the size of the front wings. Now, the effect of that, for those who are not technical, is that the downforce on the car will immediately be reduced by something in the order of 15%. Now, that is an immediate measure for the next race. For the next race but one, which is Canada, we're going to firstly increase the lateral protection for the driver's head by increasing the size of the sides of the cockpit. Secondly, in order to allow the team to do that without any difficulty from the point of view of weight or strength, therefore, we're going to increase the minimum weight limit with effect from Canada by 25 kilos. Thirdly, we are going to bring in provisions for strengthening the front wishbones in a technical way, which I won't trouble you with, but the effect of which will be to make it much less likely that the front wheel will become partially detached and strike the driver, or indeed become detached at all. We will be changing the configuration of the front suspension to avoid, as far as possible, the wheel striking the driver, as a backup for lateral protection.
Welcome back to the most glorious Grand Prix of the season, Monaco, where we can see John Watson in the pit lane with Mika Hakkinen.
Thank you, Allard. Yes, I have Mika here, and Mika, you're a fairly happy chap this weekend. First front row grid position in the Grand Prix, second quickest here this morning. What are you looking forward to this afternoon?
I'm looking for a good finish, for sure. It's going to be extremely long race. Monaco always is the hardest and toughest race of the year, I would say, because corners are very tight. It's a lot of barriers, but you have to be very careful with the front suspension of the car, not to damage the suspension. And I mean, I had an extremely good day yesterday. I was qualifying very well in the front row, and that means I had a very good chance to get the lead in the first corner. And if I get that, I just have to keep others behind.
Well, talking about taking it carefully, in qualifying yesterday you were certainly spectacular, and on two occasions we saw you first just kiss the barrier, but the second time you gave it a good old dig.
I was extremely on the limit yesterday, I would say. And the first lap I was on the limit and very close to the barrier, and second time it was even a bit more. I found in the car at the moment very good to drive, and I found in with the McLaren very good lines and good speeds. And touching the barrier in the qualifying is not a big deal. I said, you don't touch too much.
Well, now the Grand Prix at 78 laps, and of course pit stops are a major feature for tyres and refueling. There's a new speed limit in the pit lane, 80 kilometers per hour. And if you exceed that, you're going to be brought in for a stop-go penalty. But how can you tell when you're doing 80 kilometers per hour? There's no speedometer in your car.
I mean, we had a system in the ref counter at the moment in our car, which tells if we're going over 80 kilometers per hour. the lights start flashing, and which means driver knows immediately if you're going over the speed. And it's very important. It's easy to cheat for the driver. Driver is easy to cheat here to go faster than 80 kilometers per hour. But we saw what happened in the last race at Imola, and we can see the Monaco pit lane is very narrow, and we have to act extremely careful with the mechanics, the engineers, and all the pit crew, and also you, John. We have to be, all the people, we have to be careful here, not to go too fast and have an accident.
Well, one final question, because I know you've got to rush off to the driver's briefing. It is going to be a race about strategy. Are you going to give us any clue as to what point you'd expect to come in and stop for fuel and tyres? Once or more, possibly?
It's going to be either 1 or 2 or 3 pit stops.
Well, that's pretty conclusive, I have to say. That's the sort of information I'm used to getting from race drivers. But thank you very much, Mika. I know you've got to rush off and do your briefing, and good luck in the race later in the afternoon. I've got Ron Dennis also here, and Ron, after the tragic events that occurred 2 weekends ago in Imola, there's been call for major changes to car safety and design, and the FIA have produced, let's say, their ideas, but in reality, you as a team boss, team principal, what are your views about this future security, safety for drivers in a current Grand Prix car?
Quite obviously, John, you know, we as a Grand Prix team, and of course all the other teams have the same feelings, sincerely want to make the cars as safe as possible, and that's been a desire that we've always had. I think the primary problem at the moment is the cockpit area. The dimensions of the cockpit area are specifically designed to facilitate the rapid removal of an unconscious driver. These rules were implemented at the time that Gerhard Berger's accident took place in Imola, where it took them a long time to get him out of the car. We now think, and the governing body supports this view, that the cockpit area can be dramatically improved, bringing the sides of the car much higher and producing much better protection for the driver's head, which will also include crushable structures around the helmet to absorb the energy. It's a very difficult task to correctly execute that exercise. It will almost certainly require new chassis to be made, which you know is the primary structure of the car. It's just about achievable for Canada, and of course we'll be trying to implement at the same time as many of the changes as can be incorporated into this significant step in accordance with the wishes of the governing body.
Sorry, just to interrupt, I mean, the changes you're referring to give the driver neck and head more protection, how could that, for example, with your car here, how could you implement those changes in that very short space of time?
Well, for McLaren, it's somewhat different to most of the other teams. We have a tremendous capacity at our factory, and almost certainly we will produce new chassis. It's a huge task. Of course, you have to design what you're going to do first, then you have to produce the tooling, and then you have to manufacture the chassis. I don't think anyone can produce chassis faster than McLaren, and each one of ours takes a week and a half. So quite clearly, this isn't an option for Spain. Some of the other teams will probably retrofit sections to the existing cars, which will achieve, I think, a very significant step forward, but perhaps not as big a step as can be achieved if the cars are completely redesigned, and that's at this moment what we intend to do.
Ron, thank you very much, and we've now got to go back to Allard in the booth, and Allard, those are interesting words from Ron Dennis and McLaren, and certainly major changes are due to the shape of Formula One cars over the next, well, the remaining 12 races of the '94 season and the future.
Thank you very much, John. This was the morning warm-up show. We are about to go and watch a Porsche Carrera race here. Then there's another couple of races, and then the Grand Prix. It'll start at 3:30 continental time, which is 2:30 in the UK. And of course, we will be on air half an hour before the race starts with interviews on the grid and anything else we can find and show you. From a very sunny, very glamorous and very busy Monaco circuit, John Watson, Ron Dennis, Mika Hakkinen, Richard Grundy and Richard West say thank you very much for watching 1 hour of morning warm-up from Monaco. We will be back very shortly with the Grand Prix proper, with that man you're watching there on pole position. Thank you for watching. See you later. Bye for now.
The Formula One World Championship is brought to you on Eurosport by Ford, Formula One's most successful team. Hitachi. Elf Fuel, World Champion.